Thank you everyone for joining us today. Just a quick introduction. I'm Jessica. I've been working behind the scenes at TRLab for a year now, and have been working with the Calder Foundation and the team at TRLab to bring the Calder question to life. And I am incredibly excited with what we have in store for our NFT community and the art world. So today I'm excited that we're all on this talk to share a little bit more with the TRLab community about our project and how it came to be. I will now turn it over to our guests. Could everyone please go around introducing yourself and what you do?
Sure. Well, I'm Sandy Rower. I'm the president of the Calder Foundation. Calder was my grandfather, and as a teenager, I recognized there was a need to create some sort of a place to hold the archive and information related to his legacy, and started the Calder Foundation in 1987. Audrey, you're next.
Oh, I'm next? I was waiting for Sing to go. Hi, everyone. I'm Audrey. I'm the CEO and a co-founder at TRLab, which is an Fine Art NFT Platform. And our mission is to fuse NFT technology with fine art to pioneer a new way of collecting.
Hi, everyone. I'm Li-Cohen. I'm an art lover and working in the art industry, which is a great privilege and also huge responsibilities, which I take it very seriously and I enjoyed it. I'm a co-founder and the chairwoman of TRLab, also a non-executive deputy chairman at Christie's.
Awesome. I think what's super cool is we have a lot of art lovers right now, and at TRLab we find ourselves in between that NFT space and fine art space, as Sheen was saying. So it's always interesting to hear how folks from each of these communities react. So this is a question for you, Sandy. Coming from the art world, what was your impression of NFTs prior to working on this project? And was there a moment or instance that changed your mind potentially?
Well, I had very little education about NFTs, so I had a very kind of sour point of view about an opportunistic, what seemed to me to be manipulated and opportunistic kind of opening that was, I don't know, it was pretty uninteresting until I got to the point of realizing that the blockchain was clearly, it's clearly part of our human evolution and future. And so how could we engage as the Calder Foundation in a way that was meaningful, in a way that brought a unserviced audience some of Calder's communication? And that really started with a conversation with Audrey and Sin. We were all at Art Basel in Miami. I don't even know when that was. Was that only a year and a half ago or something? When was it?
Last December.
Wait, today it's July now.
Yes.
You mean it was only December? Like a half a year ago? Wow.
Yeah.
Seems like it was about 4 years ago. And we were there, we were sitting having a conversation, and you guys were new at TRLab, having started it recently, doing some cool stuff. And that conversation was really inspiring, that there was a legitimate way to engage people that didn't really maybe know about Calder, or people that didn't know much about art, people that were interested in other cool universes, people that were in a different kind of culture, and then could come to Calder, because Calder, of course, is an artist that connects us to these kind of other realms. And we think about Web3, or we think about the whole NFT experience as being an alternative, not reality, but an alternative perception and existence. And that was the basis of all of Calder's work. So there's an immediate tie-in, especially the fact that Calder is kind of ridiculously, he's this super, super famous artist, but yet his work is widely misunderstood. And having an alternative place, an alternative experience to express what he was about, it was a really amazing tie-in. And it gave, of course, you guys the challenge to, how do you express that to your community in a way that, you know, makes them excited to come in and draws them in.
I love that. And maybe, Shin, you could speak to what makes you excited to bring Calder into the NFT space, knowing that he's such an interesting artist. What do you think the NFT community would love about Calder?
Oh, there's so much to learn about Calder because I met Sandy around about 15 years ago. And at that time, I just, you know, I saw Calders in the museums, but I never really understand, and, you know, I didn't have that knowledge about what's everything behind. And over the years, Sandy, you know, patiently educated me. And so I learned so much about Calder. It's not only the few, you know, mobiles everybody familiar with. There's a lot of depth and things behind, you know, his innovation. And what I really excited is about accessibility. And, you know, it's not everybody can travel around, go to the museum or own a Calder piece. But with this project, I think every art lover gonna have the chance to learn and maybe to own the Calder.
Sin, I love that you call me patient. That's certainly not one of
Yes,
the
you
character
did.
traits that it's not a character trait any of my friends would consider to use.
I'm talking
That's so
about,
funny.
you know, in the last 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. You know, also you said accessibility, and I think that was one of the other things that came out of our conversation in Miami was this idea that we could present Calder's art in a way that brings you closer to it, like closer than you can get in a museum in a way, like another way to get close. And that's always been the frustration at the foundation. Like, how do we bring the audience closer to the work? Because we have to preserve and protect it in the museum setting, but yet we want to bring the audience closer to experiencing it. So the possibility of this digital world of experiencing the work, of course, the best experience you can have is with the work itself. But when it's in a glass box or in a museum behind a fence, like you can't really have the experience that Calder wanted you to have. So you were very persuasive in sort of describing how people could have that kind of closer experience potentially. One of the things you described, you were talking about another artist where like a camera could fly over a sculpture really close, like it was a giant landscape, but it was really just a sculpture that was 3 feet tall. But you had this experience of a very intimate flyover of every little nuance of shape and the little cracks and the tool marks and the things, and seeing the sculpture in a way you can't see it, like at MoMA or something like that.
Yes, you know, that's what Audrey and I, we've been talking about. We believe there is a whole world of Calder's artworks with a unique concept that waiting to be discovered. I think that's the whole TRLab was so excited about it when we started working on the project.
Yeah, and in adding to that, I think probably most people, Jess probably feels this way too. We all took a crash course into the world of Calder, and it was goosebumps the entire time. And I think so much of what we wanted to do is to amplify that experience to a new generation of collectors in a way that was never possible before without this technology. And so I think that's also why, I mean, I love the foundation and Sandy so much for taking this leap and working with us, because it's definitely something that's very experimental. It's not something that has been done ever before. And I love that Sandy was willing to do it with us, to align with our mission to be really innovative and inventive and to provide access in a way that in a way that I think will be very special.
You know, it's also important to know in the history of this of the digital age in Calder, we had at least a dozen serious proposals from different highly skilled and experienced people to do something in the digital age. Mostly there were NFT proposals, but other proposals too. And all of them were financially based. Like, hey, we can make a lot of money for you if you do this. And we just felt that that was kind of the wrong approach. Coincidentally, our launch, as you both know, but the listeners don't know, we kind of postponed our launch to the right entry point where this, what do you call it, crypto winter now, where the crypto world has kind of had a little quiet moment. And it's exactly the right opportunity for us because we can demonstrate that we're not interested in making a lot of money. That's not our goal here. And if in the end we make some money, we have this cool idea to actually sponsor the restoration of public sculpture, things that have been like if you think about sculptures around the world that are owned by cities, and cities are all bankrupt. Cities don't have any money to restore their Calder sculptures. So if there is some money at the end of the day, then we can use that money to fund the restoration of these sculptures for the public benefit. And you guys and I, we talked about this, I don't know, from the very beginning, and then nicely we've seen that other people have developed the same idea. A few of the other participants in the space have come up with this idea of restoration.
Yeah, and jumping ahead, what I love about the fact that the proceeds will go to benefit the new Sculpture Conservation Fund. In a way, we preserve Calder's physical artworks for generations to come, and then with NFT technology, it also offers us another way to preserve Calder's legacy in this sort of digital future. So maybe can you speak a little bit more about how you think the innovation of NFT technology furthers the foundation's goals of preservation and education?
Well, as Audrey was saying, it's an experiment, and we don't really know. I mean, the kind of I think that like the risky part, the Calder Foundation's risky part right now is to just be willing to experiment and see, because none of us know how in 3 years or 5 years or maybe even 5 weeks, how the space is going to alter and change. And even as we roll out our semesters of education, that's your cool idea. We also have the possibility to change it in real time and make it, add aspects that we didn't think of today, which is very cool. So it's hard to answer your question. I don't know. I mean, I also don't know, like, the thing you can't see in a Calder sculpture is the experience in a real space. And since very few people can have that experience, the experiment of bringing a new real space to our experience is exciting. I don't know if it'll be successful. We're going to see.
Maybe we can pivot to talk a little bit more about the foundation, actually, because for those of you who don't know, Sandy, who's with us, besides being Calder's grandson, also started the foundation almost 35 years ago. So this is sort of a broader question to start us off with, but maybe you could let everyone know, who was Alexander Calder, the person to you?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. He was my grandfather. My family's very small, and my family's very close. There were only 4 Calder grandchildren, 2 on my mom's side and 2 on my aunt's side. And we're all involved with foundation activities in certain ways and to different degrees. But my grandfather was a very serious guy. I mean, some of the legacy, like if you look at him being interviewed in the 1950s or 60s in historic documents, he's being kind of silly. And the reason he's being silly is he doesn't really want to answer questions. So he's trying to put off the interviewer without offending, just being sort of goofy sometimes. And part of that was unfortunate because he got this kind of goofy reputation as a person, and then that bled into his art. So in the 60s and 70s, at the very end of his life, people were teaching Calder as being sort of more of his work being entertaining instead of something deeper. So that's been my biggest responsibility, is how do I educate people about what he's trying to communicate, what he's trying to share. And one of the earliest quotes about his abstract sculpture, this is in 1932, he speaks about how his work has no meaning. Not that it's meaningless, but that there's no preconceived identity to what the sculpture is trying to communicate to you, which is really tough. It's really tough on the audience, because that means you have to be open-hearted enough to, as you approach the work, to try and figure out what it means to you. There isn't a curator telling you, like, spoon-feeding you meaning. And he's also not dealing with, like, his deepest personal psychological issues like some other artists, like Picasso or other artists. And so he's allowing you to participate, not just as a viewer, but as kind of part of the art itself. And if you're part of the art itself, then it takes you to, like, complete other, this kind of experimental space where you are part of the art. And his great friend Marcel Duchamp kind of speculated that art exists, 50% of the art is the viewer, what the viewer brings to it, the viewer's experience. Like, that the art doesn't exist until the viewer observes it and connects with it and brings kind of a meaning to it. So it's much more far out. So the foundation's main activity is making exhibitions in museums across the planet. I mean, our projects reach about 2.5 million visitors a year worldwide, and that's really gratifying. But this new space could reach actually many more people, and in a totally different way. So I'm leaving it to you, Sin and Audrey and Jess, to let us know what that way is.
I love that answer too, because I think you dig at a lot of very interesting concepts. The first being that Calder's art, as he describes it, has no meaning. So this is sort of like another broad question, I guess. What questions or ideas do you think Calder was seeking to address through his work?
Well, Calder, in a very deep way, Calder was trying to connect us humans, one at a time, like an individual experience. He's trying to connect us to something else, something very mysterious. That could be other people. That could be, the nature of everything, right? The universal, whatever that universal energetic is. And that's also what's exciting about, whether you want to call it Web3 or whatever you're going to call it, like this alternative reality, which is a real reality. It's not a fake reality. It's a new reality for humans to exist in this place, and something that we're learning about. Very few people understand, and I'm certainly not one of them. I don't understand it in a deep way. I'm learning what this new reality is. And some of our collaborators have been very, very helpful in sharing with me their vision of what this new reality is and how it affects our true life, right? Not a fake life, not an imagined life, but our actual life, how it's part of what's going on as we evolve. And I don't mean the question of, like, artificial intelligence and the dangers of artificial intelligence and kind of, the menacing aspect of artificial intelligence and control of humanity, and, going back to certain Hollywood movies that are warning us to be careful. I'm talking about the real human experience of connecting in a new way that we're not really, I mean, some of us, a small percentage of us, are connecting in a real way. But as this whole space evolves, I mean, even just like right now, we're talking in a bunch of different places to a group of people in a way that was not postulated, 10 years ago. This didn't exist. Even 5 years ago, it was like at its infancy that you could listen to a group of people talk about a highly precise subject. And that's just part of our daily life now in a very, very rich way, not an artificial way. Was that an answer to your question? I don't even know.
Yeah, I think it's obviously not a question that's easy to answer. So I think you did a good job sort of explaining. I think I would be interested to hear how you think, as one of Calder's grandchildren, how growing up around his artworks and seeing him work as an artist, how do you think that has affected how you view his artworks and view his way of life?
Well, those are two very different questions. Let me get back to his way of life in a second. Observing him, and I didn't work with him. I didn't work for him. He never had a studio assistant ever. He never had somebody participate in the creation of his works of art ever, except for the monumental. There are like 350 monumental outdoor sculptures that he built and conceived and constructed with technicians who followed his direction. And he didn't just give them a model and have them blow it up into full size. He adjusted, corrected shapes, curves, sizes, vectors of energy in the sculptures throughout the whole process. But in his studio, he never had anybody work with him or for him ever. It's just kind of astonishing. You think about great artists today. I mean, like Jeff Koons, he's got so many people helping him execute his works. And I don't mean that to be a criticism. I think Jeff is a very interesting artist. But the fact that he could just be in his studio, he didn't play, the radio. He didn't play music. He didn't have any entertainment at all. It was just a silent place with him hammering, drilling, filing, making the noises of what he did. To me, it was like a holy place. It was a place you didn't go in there to like screw around. You went in there to do your own work, which as a kid, I made kid stuff. I made stuff I thought was cool as a kid. I wasn't making sculpture. I was just making stuff that kids were intrigued by. And my grandfather would just like silently come over and show me how to use a tool. Like he just would correct my movement of how to use the tool. And then I completely understood. It was like, it was like communicating to me in a silent way through gesture, but also somehow mysteriously, like energetically sharing with me what his process was. Beyond the fact that we spoke about his work and spoke about what is intent and things like that. Just being with him working was something so profound for me. I mean, I was 13 when he died, so I was young, but I was old enough to have enough experience with him to have some kind of deeper realizations about not how he drilled a hole, obviously, but why he did things in certain ways. And that's been very helpful to inform me about his work and in our research about work, about his sculptures and in our archive. Like I go through and I look at photographs of work and I wonder, why is this sculpture dated 1953 when the construction techniques are more similar to 1933 than 53? And then we do more research and we find out that the sculpture was actually in an exhibition in the 30s, and that my premonition was correct, that it's actually from the 30s and was later dated by somebody else, not the artist, because they didn't know a date, so they just like made up a date. And that became part of his historic record, even though it was incorrect. So a lot of that has happened over the decades of the Calder Foundation archive. And my early experience with him and understanding his work has been so informative and helpful. But I want to get back to you. You asked the question about his lifestyle. You kind of asked about his lifestyle and his kind of the way that he lived. He lived was, his life wasn't a sham. His life was full of friendship. And there were many artists that were his deep friends who didn't make financial success, and he sponsored them and helped them. And there were some artists at early in their career that were just really, like Ellsworth Kelly was now a famous artist, but in his career, when he moved back from Paris to New York, and he had a studio down at Coenties Slip in New York City, in Manhattan, he didn't have enough money to pay his rent, and my grandfather paid his rent for a bunch of months just to help him get settled and help him in his work. So kind of his success became a community success as far as he was concerned. He didn't have this obsession with money. He had this obsession with all of the people around him and sharing that. And you you see that in his jewelry. A lot of people don't know he made jewelry, and it's all made with his own hands. He didn't make drawings on pieces of paper and then give them to, Cartier or Tiffany's to execute 1,000 or 100 of them. He made them with his own hands in his studio, just like he made his sculptures. They were just as important to him as the sculptures. And when you wear his jewelry, if you're lucky enough now, of course, now they're wildly expensive. But in the time, in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, people, women and men, would wear his jewelry to openings, to museums, and they'd have the experience of seeing each other. And even if you didn't know who the person was, you recognize, because his jewelry is very recognizable. You'd be like, oh, wow, you're a Calder person too. You're part of this tribe. Um, so yeah, the lifestyle is super simple. He throughout his life he wore pretty much the same style of clothes. He didn't change his costume as he became more famous and more wealthy. He drove the same kind of cars, very practical. Maybe he built himself a bigger studio, but that was kind of the biggest success of his life.
I really like that answer, and I really like hearing your stories about who Calder was as a person, because I think with the Calder question, what we hope to achieve is to open up a new way to sort of appreciate this artist. In his art, yes, but also what he stood for as an artist. And jumping around a bit, but one exciting facet of this project is going to be the unprecedented access collectors will have to the Calder Foundation. So one of the prizes that we announced actually entails a visit to the Calder's property in Roxbury, which is where I believe you are right now, which is not open to the public. Can you tell us a little bit more about the history of this place and what makes a visit there so special?
Yeah, it's an incredible place, not because it's fancy. It's not, an amazing chateau in the Loire in France. It's a very simple, humble place that the Calders were looking. They basically had moved back from France in 1933 and were looking for a place that they could, to own a home in New York City was too expensive. So they decided to rent apartments in New York and yet buy a place in the country because it was more approachable and accessible. And they went like to 5 or 6 different states around New York City looking for a place that they could call home. And they really had a hard time finding the right place. They wanted to have, landscape. They didn't necessarily want to own a lot of land, but they wanted a view and it had rolling hills, and they couldn't find what they were looking for. And then finally, after, I don't know, they saw dozens of homes, dozens of places, they ended up here in Connecticut. And they both, when they first saw it, when they rounded the hill and they saw this property, they both exclaimed, "That's it!" They were both super excited to see this place. And again, it's not because, the house is 1760. It's a very old wooden structure built by a farmer, simply built. It wasn't the house that inspired them. It was the landscape. There were these large stone outcroppings jutting out of the hillside. It was almost like a sculpture park in a way. Like these big rocks were part of, seeing Earth present stones as sculpture somehow was inspiring. So they bought this place, and in that summer of 33, my grandfather used his own hands to renovate the place. He didn't have enough money he could buy the place. He actually borrowed money from one of his friends from college and then bought the place and then had to repair everything with his own hands. And we have pictures of him working on the house in 33. So he made very little sculpture that year. I mean, he made the sculpture up till June in France. And then when he came to America, there are very, very few things he made in 33. And then in 34, there was this huge explosion of vocabulary. Like if you were to see an exhibition of works only from 1934, you'd be shocked at how diverse the vocabulary is, the different types of experimentation he was doing. And also it's the first time he made sculpture officially, for the outdoor sculptures for the hillside. And the first 2 works, which are in the Calder Foundation collection, are very thin sheet metal. And of course, when a wind came, the mobiles got damaged. They got bent and they got damaged. And then the third work he made out of welded steel. It's actually called Steelfish, 1934. And that piece was directly inspired by this hillside right out the window. In fact, it was a hillside that didn't belong to Calder at the time, but he used it. It belonged to the farmer neighbor. And now that hillside belongs to the Calder Foundation, we've been able to secure actually 350 acres around the original Calder 18 acres to keep development, push development at bay and keep it away from the Calder view and the Calder little valley here. So when you look through Calder's studio, you'll see a valley the way it was in the 1950s. and we're continuing to work on it to actually backdate it to like the 1940s, when he was really vigorously working here before he then again moved back to Europe. So the house itself is still filled with his books and his records and my grandmother's books and records, and the piano. They have a room we call the big room, and there's a piano in it that was actually Calder's father's piano. It's a baby Steinway that many famous jazz musicians came to play music, and they would have these parties that would be 3 days long, and people crashed out everywhere, like 100 and something people here on the property for days long, having these kind of ragers. This was something the Calders were famous for. So the place, the house, and the studio exists very much, like it was when he was still alive. And when he died in 1976, my family was able to hold on to the property, and actually we closed it up and just let it as a time capsule, just preserved it. And now we're figuring out a way to engage people in the most modest way. We have to preserve and protect the place, but once in a while we can do a tour and share it. So the people that have the greatest success on your platform are the people that are going to have the chance. Is it even clear what that is? Maybe Audrey, I don't know. I forgot to ask you, who gets to come to Roxbury?
Yes, only the top collectors will be able to have that privilege. I'll let Audrey speak to that.
Yes, and I think top collectors doesn't necessarily mean the collectors who have spent the most money. Is the collectors that from the beginning of the project will consistently prove that they're participating and engaging in the project. Things like attending the talk today, all the way to how they're going to engage with the free entrance into the project, and how are they going to prove that they're really learning deeper about Calder, whether they've only known him by name or they've known a bit about him. But as Sandy says, one can always learn more about Calder.
I think that's true. Even me.
And I think if there's one thing I want to add to Roxbury is that a couple of people on the TRLab team had the privilege to visit with Sandy. I believe it was in early May. And I still have goosebumps thinking about it. It was such an incredible experience. Like, my hands are sweating slightly right now thinking about it. I never thought that I would feel so close to such an inventive, really once in a generation type of artist. And Sandy's stories that he shares, as many of you have heard within the space, really brings Calder to life in a way that was very different from, when I went to Pace Gallery in 2019 when they opened their new gallery on West 25th Street, and I got to see amazing mobiles. Sandy, I pronounced it right this time. But it's just such an intimate experience, and it really feels like it's as if Calder has just left for lunch and will return any second, and you feel so close to something that is so great and so hard to put your finger on that the only way to describe it is goosebumps and being moved. At least that's how I felt as an art lover visiting for.
I'd like to add something to that, Audrey, which is part of the reason I said to my team at the foundation, let's do this, let's move forward with this, is the authenticity of what you're saying. Like, a lot of people would just say that but not really mean it. And that was an incredible day when a lot of your team was with you here in Roxbury. It was just it was fantastic to share it with you and to have everybody be so engaged and ask questions and be really curious and be emotionally moved. And it was something very special for me. And I kind of hesitate to say this, but it's very unusual to have people understand art in a deeper way and have them get closer to art and have meaning to them personally beyond collecting identifiable assets. And when you're talking about in your space, when you say collector, that's very different than in my space in the art world. When you say collector, it means something entirely different, really. I mean, you're talking about maybe people who buy NFTs when you say collector, but in my world, a collector is someone who's very privileged because they can afford to buy art. They have enough money, they have all their needs met, that they can then go and buy things for their home. And in the casual case, it's decorations. In the less casual case, it's things that are more iconic and recognizable by famous artists that are expensive. But that still doesn't mean those people have any real deeper understanding of what the art is about. You know, just because you have a Jean-Michel Basquiat on your wall or Picasso on your wall doesn't mean that you have any understanding what it is they're trying to communicate to you. In fact, they might be saying something quite offensive. I mean, Andy Warhol was a very offensive artist, as was Basquiat, as was Picasso in a certain way. But they were like literally criticizing the society that buys their work. And that's really fascinating to me, that people don't even realize, like, this is a critique of exactly what you are, if you see what I mean. And so being able to provide a new view of Calder to a fresh group of people who aren't those quote unquote collectors, that's why I'm just kind of, you know, delineating the difference when you use the word collector than when I use the word collector. It's like a totally different group of people, like people that are thinking about life and experiencing life in kind of a different way. I don't know. Am I off the mark? Does it make sense?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I've been feeling more as I've been getting a little bit older and meeting new friends who are interested in art, but they're just kind of, one, they may not have enough money for art. I mean, I don't know anyone my age who has enough money for a Calder, definitely. And two, I think there's a lot of gatekeeping where if you're not someone or if you don't know someone, it's actually incredibly difficult to purchase an artwork. So I really like that distinction that you made where the collector term that we're using signifies different things. Like maybe I should say art lover or art enthusiast instead. Because I do think that a lot of the people that are collecting in the NFT space are people who haven't had previously had access before, because only such a little group in the world had access.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that this experiment is exactly what expands that. I don't know, you know, if in the end we're going to have 30 new well-educated Calder folk, or we're going to have 300 or 3,000. I have no idea how this even works. And that's part of the experience. But just the foundation has just kind of like let go and letting this process unfold. I think that's kind of also miraculous about our institution, is that we're nimble enough to just let things happen. Certain things we're so involved with, certain things we have to be so instrumentally involved with, and then other things we can step back and just let it unfold. The foundation's small enough that's another way we can operate, that's kind of cool.
I really love this conversation and thinking about what this new generation of collector, quote unquote, looks like. Speaking of, Sandy, our community of collectors or art enthusiasts have been submitting questions for you to answer using the hashtag #MyCalderQuestion over the past 24 hours. And so the following question has been selected by folks at the Calder Foundation, and means that the submitter will now have access to Early Edge, which will hopefully get them closer to that Roxbury visit and the ability to experience Roxbury, as you were discussing. So the question that we do have is, was there a dream project that Alexander Calder always wanted to create but never got the chance?
That's a super cool question. Who submitted that? Do we know? At what?
We can find that after.
Okay.
Maybe answer the question first, and I'll find it.
Okay. Well, we actually did an exhibition. It was curated by Hans Ulrich Obrist at the Botín Foundation in Spain a couple years back. It was exactly that question. He asked the question, what were Calder's unrealized projects, his idea. that artists often have projects that are kind of their dream project, or project that they're inspired by, but that doesn't happen, or commission that, you know, that they're working on, but then ultimately doesn't happen, that kind of thing. And so there's actually an entire catalog of the most important projects, but I'll describe one of them. It's actually a series of intentions, and Calder had this idea that there could be a stage performance of motions on stage in real time, meaning objects that moved in space that weren't people, weren't dancers, that he was choreographing movement in a theater where people are seated in a theater on a stage. And that whole concept was that there could also be music, but that your eye would delight in an abstract performance of objects in different amplitudes, speeds, directions. And so how he did this was he actually made drawings of these kind of choreographic notes. He'd draw the objects. He drew the proscenium first, and then he would draw the object, the shape, the color, and then he would draw a dashed line that showed the movement of the object through space. And then each one of the dashed lines had a time sequence. So one of the dashed lines might begin at 15, meaning at 15, if the piece was 100 minutes long, it'd be at 15 minutes, the object would appear on stage. It'd go through this loop of cycle of space, of movement, and then would exit at 45, let's say. And each one had their own thing, appearing for a second or appearing for the whole time, moving very slowly, moving very quickly, spinning, looping, whatever they were. Very, very exotic. Like you think about it as a mobile, but a mobile in performance in multiple parts and almost even in 4 acts. There's one that's in multiple acts. The curtain closes and something else happens. And maybe that was too much of an explanation, but those are something that are really intriguing to us. And in the process of doing the Bottin exhibition, we actually hired an animator to make a digital animation of explaining what Calder's drawing means. And the digital animation is not a work of art, and it's even not the performance. It's just like a way for us or even a curator to see how the drawing would be explained. Hopefully that in sometime in the future, we can actually perform those things in real time, real space. So it's using the digital media as a way of explaining something that Calder was trying to teach us, and then leaping that to in real life is kind of a really interesting sequence.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, almost like how technology and innovation can continue and expand upon an artist's legacy. I think that's a very interesting question. And that leads me to a next question that I actually have for Audrey, which is why NFTs? You know, like this is one of the first time that a foundation is launching an NFT. How is the experience of the Calder question using new technology different to other projects, and what considerations needed to be made when coming up with a project like this in particular?
I think that this is really, I like to think about the relationship between art and technology a lot, where I think even though technology may inspire art, art is what challenges technology. And so much of what we're doing within this experience, and I'm calling it an experience rather than a sell or a drop, is a next generation application of NFT technology. Using NFTs not just as artworks or still images or videos, but really as tokens of a collective experience that one can take part in, and signifiers of knowledge that one have gained on the path to becoming a Calder question collector. So for those of you who may not know, there is going to be no cost to participate in the experience. There will be a cost at the very end for limited edition NFTs introduced in a later stage. But in the experience itself, you really need to use in a way that will be tracked by NFTs and by the blockchain that you are participating, and that you then unlock eligibility for the ultimate purchasing of the artworks. As Sandy put it better than me, we are very against sort of digital reproductions of physical Calder works. What we really have in place is something very different that brings people closer to the physical works in a way that wasn't possible before, and also underscores the lessons that you will learn as a participant through the experience about Calder's ethos, about the importance of movement and non-space within his works.
What do you mean by non-space? That's such a great term. I'm teasing you, Audrey. So non-space is like, one of the things I say about Calder sculpture is it's not the sheet metal and wire and paint that's the art. It's the space between all of those objects. It's the space between those beautiful forms, but the beautiful forms are not the art. It's the movement of those objects in space and the creation of this new effect with you participating in it, in this kind of, non-space is the best term because it's not about our three-dimensional awareness. It's about something beyond our three-dimensional awareness. Is the fourth dimension time? We don't even know what the fourth dimension is. There's speculation about fourth dimension being different things. It could be intuition. It could be something else. Like, we can barely squeeze out of the three dimensions to get to some other dimensional experience. But Calder's sculptures exist partially in this. That's what's being proposed here by Calder, is that the sculptures exist in a place that is not the 3D. And the connection between that and what you guys are doing and what this new space is also non-space, because it's not 3D. It's some other thing. And we don't even have to say it's the fifth dimension or whatever dimension it is, or maybe it's not a dimension at all. Whatever the thing is exactly precisely connected to Calder. That was my first kind of intuitive response to this question with you guys. Once we got beyond, not being focused on financial data in the NFT space, it just became clear that there was this immediate connection. And also I had the sensation that my grandfather would be really intrigued with this this other dimensional aspect. I just wanted to share that too.
I really like that, because with Web3, I feel like there's a lot of talk about a metaverse or another dimension in a way, but this really grounds the project in Calder and what he was trying to achieve. Okay, well, to wrap up this call, I'd actually love to end on the following two questions and have you all answer it as you see fit. So the first would be, how has your understanding of Calder changed through working on this project? How so? And maybe, Sandy, this is something you want to speak to as well, thinking about Calder and NFTs. And the second question is, following the project, what is one thing that you hope collectors will take away about Calder and his art? And feel free to answer as you wish.
Those are really tough questions to answer, because I think it's so hard to. I'm still looking for the word to really sum up my experience. To try to do that for the first question, I would say I think I thought I knew quite a lot about Calder before, in the sense that I've been to a couple of different Calder exhibitions and I read things on Calder, and I thought I really loved what I've seen. But if my biggest opinion, I guess it's how little I knew and how little I still feel like I know now, because there's so much here to be unpacked, where it's not just about it's not I'm not trying to say like it's not about the quantity of the artworks or knowing that so and so was created by Calder in what year. It's the fact that Calder really invented whole mediums of art, and it's so multidimensional that I am still trying to wrap my head around it. And this is one thing that I hope collectors take away from this project where we're not trying to say, hey, this is the end all be all, but we're asking a question together, the Calder question, with the belief that everyone can always learn more about Calder. And we're trying to do it in a way that is very fun. And Sandy questioned me once whether this is a real world, but gamification in a way that uses NFT technology.
So, for me, because of Sandy's help over the years, I have to say this experience working on a new project, it's really accelerated. It got more details, more depth. And now I really see like Calder's vision. It's already what we talk about in 21st century. It's interaction, right? Like Sandy, all the stories he just talked about. It, all Calder's work, especially the mobile, the outdoor standing mobiles, and you see those artworks with lights, interact with the light, wind, air, and with people, and can be with with our mind too. Because I remember at Whitney exhibition, and I was in front of this. I don't know if Sandy agree, but I don't know how to describe, so I have to say it's like 3D abstract painting. So it was a string holding it's a piece and keep moving in front of a white wall. So I think at the time it's like we say 3D abstract painting, and no one did it before. And so through this project, I hope collectors, art lovers will take away is Calder and his art. Everything is about sustainable quality that defines the speculation. Crypto winter or summer doesn't matter. It's a timeless but moving.
I guess it's my turn.
Yes.
The question of like learning, I'm always open to learning. I love to learn. I love to excite new brain synapses. All of us, even me, can learn untold amount about ourselves and about, through Calder's genius, we learn. And so learning about Calder is really ultimately about learning about ourselves as humans, as humanity. What is it to be human? And that question is evolving. When I began, I've been actually investigating the digital sphere for the last 5 or 6 years, because there've been the question of like issuing a Calder currency, a coin, and doing a fractional ownership plan of Calder's work, and all these different things, all these things that are like commonplace now, but we've been exploring them at the very infancy of this. If 5 years ago is the infancy, that's where I see it. And nothing really felt right, because most things were just financially driven. And nothing really went to the heart of the question of what is the human experience. And this experiment, and it really is an experiment. I don't mean to say it's, I'm not using that word lightly. It's this like open-ended experiment. Where will this series of semesters of learning about Calder and engagement with Calder and learning about yourself and learning about the earth and learning about the essential energetic of what is this earth, what people call Gaia, and what is it? What is it to be human on earth right now at this time, at this miracle of a time where so much disaster is happening and so much opportunity for humanity is happening. And in the littlest, tiniest way, Calder can be part of that. Calder can help us take the next step forward. So that's what I'm learning. That's what's opening to me in this process. And yeah.
I really love all of your answers, and I'm super excited to see where this project takes us when we begin in the fall. So thank you both Sandy, Audrey, and Shane for all of your insight today. It has been super awesome seeing the community react to the news on Discord and get excited about Calder. And it is such an honor for TRLab to be working with the Calder Foundation on the Calder question. For folks tuning in, I wanted to make sure that you all sign up for updates on calderquestion.trlab.com, as well as meet us in our Discord and join in on the conversations on everything from Calder to NFTs to everything in between. And that's all we have for today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sandy, Sheen, and Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.